and welcome to the Glenkens story, and welcome to our celebrations. We've been around for 10 years. Thank you. I hope you've all got a program. We've got quite a busy afternoon, but we're starting off with our guest speaker. And to introduce him, I'm going to ask someone else to introduce him. I'm going to ask David Bartholomew to introduce him, because David was one of the first people in 1,000 years to actually see the Galloway Hoard. So what better person to introduce than David? David, would you like to come forward? Thank you.
Thank you, and good to be back in the Glenkens for the day as well. Dr. Adrián Maldonado received his PhD at the University of Glasgow in 2011 with a thesis entitled Christianity and Burial in Late Iron Age Scotland, AD 400 to 650. And after that became a lecturer in archaeology at the Universities of Glasgow and Chester. He joined the National Museum of Scotland in 2018 as a research fellow to do a 3-year reassessment of the collections relating to the 9th to the 12th centuries AD, including the Viking Age, the decline of the Pictish kingdoms, the emergence of the Gaelic-speaking Kingdom of Alba and the Kingdom of Scotland. The project culminated in his 2021 book, Crucible of Nations, Scotland from Viking Age to Medieval Kingdom. Since then, he has been responsible for supporting the delivery of academic and public engagement outcomes as part of the Arts and Humanities Research Council-funded research project Unwrapping the Galloway Hoard, as well as contributing to the wider research of the Galloway Hoard project. We were delighted to welcome Adrián to the Cat Strand in beginning of September 2022, to deliver a lecture at our Early Peoples of Galloway Day Conference, where he spoke on late antique Scotland, the earliest Christians in Galloway. There is no better person to welcome back to give us an update on research into the Galloway Hoard, with over 10 years now having passed from its first discovery, which I was privileged to be part of. I invite him now to give our anniversary lecture, 10 years on from the foundation of the Glenkens story, as a means of sharing and learning about our history. Adrián, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks, David, for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be back here. And, well, you could spend hours, I could spend hours, I know, talking about the Galloway Hoard. But we've actually, because the project that we're working on is funded by the AHRC, it has a time-limited range, and it just came to an end this month. So formally, that project is now wound up, and we're dealing with the massive amount of data that we've produced. But as part of that, we've also been able to take advantage of the National Museum's media and communications team, and so we've actually done quite a lot of videos, we've done a lot of social media, and there's a lot of information available online. So I could dazzle you with all these pictures, and I will, because they're amazing. But the point of all of it is to say that the Galloway Hoard is just a world first, completely unique, not just national, not just regional, international. And that's proven by the fact that it is now actually taking a world tour. So it's just left the UK and has landed in Australia, in Adelaide. And so the Hoard is now on display there. And and it'll be on further stops from there. But eventually, in due course, when it comes back from its trip around the world, it is going to come back to the museum, and then eventually a part of it will be displayed basically in perpetuity in Kirkcudbright Art Gallery, and part of it will be displayed in Edinburgh. So that's the long-term plans for it now. So I'll show you what I can today. And what we're going to be talking about is the stuff of the Hoard, the shinies, but it's to make the point that there were humans involved in putting this Hoard together and then putting that Hoard in the ground. And it's easy to lose sight of that, but the Galloway Hoard gives us names, words, There's even a coin. There's things that we can date. There's things that we can radiocarbon date. And unlike many other hoards from the Viking Age or from prehistory, there's very rarely any clue as to who left it and why. And in the Galloway Hoard, we actually have a wealth of clues about why this came to be buried. But what we don't know is why Balnagee, why didn't they come back for it? And and lots of other questions that I think we'll bring up here. I'll start with what's usually the end. It's the thanks. I never get to it because we're always going down these little rabbit holes. But it's important to say that it was donations and contributions of work and partnerships with so many different people, so many different groups. But it's important to say as well that the fundraising that actually secured it for the nation involved 1,600 individual donors as much as the big charitable bodies and the Scottish government itself. So it's worth always saying thanks again. So here we are. A quick timeline just to catch everybody up. You know this better than anybody, but it's important to go through it again just to catch everybody up. 2014, Derek McLennan and his team, with David, of course, makes the initial discovery. And again, this is the kind of thing you teach in classes now. They knew what they had found, they called the right people, and it was sort of done properly. Okay, and so the excavator who took the call out was Andy Nicholson, who's the archaeologist in D&G Council. There's him. You can't see his face because he's hard at work. That's the top layer of the hoard, just in between his feet there. So you can see him drawing, recording. All the equipment is out. So he's, this is exactly how you want it to be done every time, if possible. Okay. Takes its time to wind its way through the treasure trove process because it goes to the lab right away. And that's the second important thing. First of all, it was excavated and recorded properly. And secondly, after that, it was sent to a lab with cold stores, with refrigerators, with all the right equipment to make sure that this precious organic material stays preserved in a way that we were able to study it now. Okay, so that's the other important thing. It took a long time for AOC Archaeology and Don McLaren in particular, their fine specialists, to actually extract everything, record everything, and make sure we knew exactly what was in the hoard before it could be valued and all the rest of it. That goes through it. The fundraising campaign begins in 2017, and the outcome is it was allocated to the National Museum of Scotland, where they were able to use the lab expertise to conserve it and analyze it in a way that basically pulls out all of the stops. Funding from the Scottish government and eventually the AHRC was able to throw basically everything but the kitchen sink at this hoard, which is how we know what we know. More particularly, after Don McLaren of AOC Archaeology does the catalogue, then it's over to Mary Davis, who is our conservator/genius at the National Museum of Scotland. I like to say that the initial exhibition of the Galloway Hoard in 2021 is actually an art installation. It's Mary, the conservator's handiwork. And you can see how it is recorded. We have time-lapse videos of her cleaning these things off painstakingly for many, many hours. Nobody knows more about this hoard intimately than the conservator herself. And that was something that we were able to bring specifically. So it wasn't just sort of relying on the team of experts that we already had at NMS. We were able to bring one of the top experts in organic material, in glass, in silver. So we were very lucky to have her, and she's still with us for at least another couple of weeks, I think. The exhibition in 2021, and then finally the AHRC project, where I jumped on to the project. This is the family photo. The first time ever last year. It had never been photographed. We do have group photos with the finders where all the stuff is laid out and still all dirty, covered in mud. But the vessel, the lidded vessel, was still sealed up and wrapped up in its conservation grade material to keep the textiles cool. So all of the stuff from inside the vessel wasn't in those pictures, only the silver and the more robust stuff from the outside. This is the first time that all of the stuff has been together, and it was only last year. So as soon as we took it out for this photography, everybody in the museum came out and says, I'd like to see it too. So this is like a wonderful and quite emotional kind of to see it all laid out, having been cleaned up and more or less understood by us now after all this time. But the thing to say about it is that, we talk about it as the Galloway Hoard. It's actually hoards within hoards within hoards. And that's another amazing thing that we've only been able to sort out because it was excavated properly. Now, most of the Viking Age hoards that we have, especially the very largest ones that we have in our museum in the NMS, actually came out of the ground in the 19th century, and some of them were excavated literally by children, because it's kids playing in the dirt who often find treasure and things like these before metal detectorists. And so we're lucky to have as many pieces of silver as we do have from these hoards, like the Scale Hoard, like the Store Rock Hoard. But we know that they're incomplete, and we know that there's things missing, and things were scraped off, and a couple of coins get kept behind by the finder. We know these things it did happen and do. So the exception of the Galloway Hoard is that we know exactly what came out of the ground, and we can kind of piece it together and pull apart all these little layers and phases. So it's really significant, and that's something that now is making us go back to these older hoards and say, maybe this was actually layers of hoards as well. Maybe there was groups in here, and it's making us kind of question. Maybe there was more organic material. Maybe there was more textile that was lost in these other hoards. So it's making us question everything we know about Viking Age hoards. Okay, I'll go through it very quickly. Of course, these are the layers. There's an upper layer, and then to everyone's surprise, a larger lower layer where a lot of the gold and strange objects came from. The thing to say is that we've been calling the upper layer the decoy layer. And that's assuming that both the upper and lower layers went into the ground at around the same time. And that's what I thought for the longest time. But I'll tell you why I think I'm leaning more towards now this being the original deposit. The original Galloway Hoard is the bottom layer, as you would expect. And then sometime later, not terribly long, it could just be a week later, but sometime later, that one went into the ground. I'll tell you why I think that. But, the story that there is a decoy to kind of put people off from the larger hoard below is a nice one, but I wonder if it's more complicated than that. And maybe this is part of the treasury that was kind of dipped into and out of for a period of time. Maybe. That's a small change, but it is a change to the story. To put you around the time then that the hoard was buried. We think of it as a Viking hoard, but since we started looking at it and found Anglo-Saxon objects, Anglo-Saxon runic inscriptions, Irish material, it's become less and less Viking, as in Scandinavian. In fact, there's very little that's actually Scandinavian about it anymore. And it's actually more Viking Age. So that's what we've called it, a Viking Age hoard rather than a Viking hoard. A subtle distinction, but it tells you about the time rather than one culture being behind it. And this is why. This is a map of Britain around that time. It says around 886, just ignore that. It's the 900s and after. That's when you have a kingdom in purple there that is controlled now by Danish speakers, okay? And then you have something that is beginning to be called Scotland, but it is actually Alba, that Gaelic word. Strathclyde becoming Cumbria over time, Galloway becoming semi-independent from everything else, and English Northumbria. Very important to keep that in mind as well. It hasn't all gone Viking. Galloway might be controlled by Hiberno-Norse Vikings, maybe, by the 10th century. But there is a part of Northumbria, the old Anglo-Saxon kingdom, that remains in English hands. Right? So Wessex and Alfred the Great are holding on in the south, and eventually that becomes the kingdom called England. But there is an English kingdom in the north, and it's separated from what's going on by this Danish-controlled kingdom. But what we don't know is how long it takes Galloway to become that independent realm that it becomes, to get that name Galloway. We know from the 11th century it's been called Galloway, but we don't know how long it takes to go from being a Northumbrian kingdom, a Northumbrian realm, to being Galloway. And the Galloway Hoard sits right in the middle of these great big changes. So at the time, we have Vikings now no longer just doing hit and run raids. They are now settling. They are taking out kings. They're installing themselves as rulers. They're taking down kingdoms and reshaping the political map. Okay, so this has gone from basically sort of raiders coming from across the sea to an army of conquest, basically, trying to take over as much as they can. And that takes shape in the 860s and the 870s. We get what's known as the Great Heathen Army, and we associate them with what's going on in England. That results in the formation of the Danelaw, Wessex, the formation of the Kingdom of England. But it has all these knock-on effects in Scotland as well. Dumbarton Rock is raided in 870 by offshoots of this same army. And so there's other involvement with what's now Scotland that we have to keep in mind, okay? But by 900, yes, the roots of what's called Scotland are being laid down. The roots of what's called England are being laid down. But none of these things exists yet. Scotland and England were still to come. The sort of Galloway Hoard sits in the middle of all of these changes. But the other thing that is definitely going on is that there are Scandinavians added to the mix. Now we get Norse language place names, and we get Viking objects, including some of the things in this hoard. So all of this stuff is in the mix. Okay, and in zooming in then to Galloway specifically, it's interesting again that this begins the 9th century as very much a core part of the Northumbrian Anglo-Saxon kingdom. We know that from place names like Whithorn, an Old English name, dedications to saints like Cuthbert, like Oswald, in Ayrshire and in Dumfriesshire and Galloway. So this starts off as a core part of the Northumbrian kingdom. And there's a reconstruction of a very important burial chapel, absolutely one of a kind there at Whithorn. Whithorn is a super wealthy establishment. There's things going on there that we just don't see anywhere else. Whithorn is terribly important, and it's known across the continent as well. We know that there's people in the Carolingian court who have Whithorn's names on their lips. We know that because they're writing it down. They're writing to each other and asking each other questions about theology and things like that, okay? And the archaeology as well speaks to that. But by the end of the 10th century and into the 11th century, Norse place names coming in, a lot of Irish coming in because the Vikings that are raiding in this area tend to come from the Hebrides or from Dublin or from the Irish Sea Zone. And then you get strange monuments like this, which are hybrids. These are Christian monuments that have Old Norse imagery on them. And these are more common on the Isle of Man and in Cumbria, but you have this fantastic one from Kilmorey, the Kilmorey Cross, just there on the Rins of Galloway. So something big has happened in these centuries, and the Galloway Hoard sits right at the sort of the crux of these huge shifts. And so why Balmagee specifically is a question that I still want to know more about. And this whole journey is to kind of get you to think about it as well, and let me know what you think. So let's start with the site. I just went to Crossmichael this morning. This isn't my photograph, but I saw it from across the water earlier today, which is really nice to do. It really gives you a sense of that landscape, but you have to know what you're looking at with archaeology. It's not just the site, it's why here. And obviously, lovely sort of fertile territory, lots of livestock capacity. The land is sort of, it's just a really good place to live, of course. Well watered, and it's a nodal place because there's Roman roads and Roman forts and temporary camps very close by. And so we know that this is a populated place, an important place. But because of that church and because of this hoard, we know that this was not an out-of-the-way place. We know that this was a central place. A very important crossing place, probably across the water there between Crossmichael and Balmagee. Okay, so an old map just to give you a sense of the lay of the land here. So there's the parish church as it is, and I think to give you a better sense of it, this is AOC Archaeology's sort of survey. This is their digital terrain model. You can see that the church is very much at the highest point, just as Crossmichael is across the water. So they're very prominent, but we don't know necessarily how far back Balmagee goes. We know that there's a place named Kirk Anders, the Church of St. Andrew, in the area, but we don't know that it's this kirk. There's no early medieval carved stones. There's no other archaeology that proves that this was certainly a church at the time of the Galloway Hoard. But it's a good possibility. You know, these things do tend to stay in place, certainly in Scotland. Where there's been excavations at churches that are parish churches later, there tends to be something earlier underneath. So it's a good possibility, but we don't know that for certain, that there has been a church there. Nice location, sloping ground, and we knew this since for a long time now. There were crop marks visible in aerial photographs, so just to center you there, we're in a different orientation now. There's a church and its burial ground. There's the manse next to it. And in the field, which the ground is very much falling away quite steeply here and less steeply here. And that level ground is where the hoard was found. But you can see the crop mark shows that there's ditches and there seems to be kind of an enclosure system around this field, which is interesting. My first thought was that this is a vallum, or the enclosure around an early monastery. But you'll notice that that ditch actually closes this field off from what eventually becomes the church, the highest point. And so it's separate, I think, from whatever's going on up here. So that's an interesting thing. In 2014, before the hoard was found, this is what kind of brought the metal detecting team to the site. They were investigating this very interesting looking place, and they found a bit of silver. And this is on display in the Stewartry Museum. It was sort of reported to Treasure Trove before the hoard, and it was allocated separately. But I think parts of this are to do either with the hoard or with what's going on the site of Balmagee at the time the hoard is deposited in the ground. What you have here is one big long ingot of silver, a bar of silver, a big one, you know, heavy guy. So a lot of silver is bound up into that, and pretty pristine. It's got marks and scratches on it, but I think that's all accidental from tumbling around in the topsoil. I don't think there's any deliberate markings on it. Now, a bit of silver melt, which is interesting. It means that they're possibly working silver on the site. That's an important clue. So it's not that the hoard has been brought from somewhere and dropped here by accident. It looks like this is a place, potentially, based on that one find, where they're actually bringing silver, processing it, and making it into ingots like these for further use. Again, Balmagee as a central place where stuff is coming and then going back out into the world. An important point if we can demonstrate that. And then I thought this was another ingot. I thought this was just a little hacked up version of that. I think that's an arm ring now, having seen it very recently. I think I can establish now that that's another arm ring, so another clue that brings us closer and closer and closer to this hoard. An ingot and an arm ring and a blob of silver. That seems to be what's going on this site, on this surface, as opposed to what was in the ground, which was in the hoard. More work from AOC Archaeology. AOC Archaeology took the call to excavate the site and do some geophysical survey with the help of the University of Glasgow. And this was the crop mark that you can see of that enclosure. Sorry, just to orient you. There's the church and its burial ground. There's the manse. The hoard find spot is basically that blob there, more or less. And these are the crop marks that you could see. But you can see that those crop marks belong to other things. There's other noise. There's possibly continuations of an enclosure there. There's a lot of noise from plowing and services, but there's noise here, there's noise here. There's more in that field. And it's not more silver hoards. I think the metal detecting team have probably sort of ruled that out in their sort of work that they did along with AOC while they were there. I don't think there's necessarily another hoard to be found, but there's more activity. There's settlement, there's buildings. This is their interpretation of what they saw in the geophysical survey. And again, it's hard to interpret. It's a little bit like, you know, what do you see with the eye of faith? But it does look like there's structures, and not just the structure that we know was found around the hoard. There's more to be done there. There's a complicated series of ditches. It's not just one. There are different things, probably at different times. And so I think there's more to be found, but this field is now scheduled. It's under sort of statutory protection. It's not impossible to organize more fieldwork there. It just means jumping through more hoops. There's more limitations and restrictions on how big a trench could be, how deep it can go. But these things can be done. If there's a will and the community is really strongly behind it, I think there is a strong case to be made. This is what I think is going on, an inner enclosure and an outer, but that is very much the eye of faith, I'll grant you. But that looks real to me. That looks real. and this is guesswork. I think there's more going on here, and the enclosure around the hoard itself is only part of the story. And that maybe that means that there's been a church here. But again, if that's right, the church sits outside of this enclosure. So I'm really confused about this, frankly. So thoughts on a postcard. Okay, the AOC team then does a small evaluation. So just to orient you, the hoard was found there. And what you have is a set of buildings superimposed one on another. And they've picked these apart, these layers, by different colors. So there's one big building. It looks like a timber hall. These are post holes. There's a very large structure. And the hoard is kind of in between the posts, unhelpfully. So we don't know if it's before or after, or while the building was there, or after the building is demolished. Frankly, we can't tell just by this excavation, sadly. But it does look like there's layers of stuff. There's been one series of big, huge pits in purple. There's a building potentially here in blue, another one there in green on a different orientation. There's lots of different things going on here. So I think this has been a long-lived settlement. It's not a pop-up settlement of the Viking Age by any means. There's a few finds that don't really tell us very much. This is just a more simplified version of that. Let me zoom in so you can see the hoard there in between post holes, so we can't relate it. It looks like the hoard was like shoved into the wall, if that's possible. Maybe it's a cupboard, maybe it's for safekeeping, maybe it is hidden. But it's hidden in a building, if that's the case. That's a possibility still. Or the other possibility is that this building is already abandoned and the hoard was buried there as a sort of closing deposit. Here's a place that nobody's going to visit. It's abandoned. Let's put it there. That's still a possibility. Unlikely to me. But there, AOC Archaeology did get some radiocarbon dates. This red line tells you the year 900 or so, okay? The date of the hoard. And the date from the ditch seems to be around the time of the hoard or maybe after. So that tells me that that ditch is probably contemporary with the hoard. But only one date. You'd want more than that. These three come from these post holes, various of these post holes. They all kind of had ranges ending in around 900. So that tells me that whatever this building is, it comes to an end soon after or at the time of the Galloway Hoard. So it's not occupied for very much longer. So I think this is very much the latter days of whatever this structure was. So that's important because, again, the people who buried the hoard didn't come back for it. And so there is a sense of an end, maybe, going on here. But there's no trace of burning. There's no trace of catastrophe. Obviously, there's no human remains that were found in this trench. And so we don't know. It looks like abandonment rather than destruction. But, again, if there was traces of fire, they would have seen it. They would have been charred. There would have been scorch marks on the soil. You know, this doesn't come to an end catastrophically. So it's a bit of a mystery. What is the building? It's a timber building of some length, at least 12 meters long. And we have a very good parallel. That's a church. That's the Minster Church there at Whithorn. That's a timber structure of some elaboration with this sort of line of this aisle, arcade of post holes around the outside. That's possible. So it could be a church. But we also have lots of timber buildings from Hoddom in Dumfriesshire that are very similar as well. And those are kiln barns. You know, they're agricultural structures. They're things like workshops and storage barns. And so we don't know, frankly. There's nothing that makes it very churchy to me. But, you know, context is everything. So I think more fieldwork is the only way you're going to find out. Okay. I'm going to zoom through the hoard itself pretty quickly because all of this information is available on the NMS website, and we have a project page called Unwrapping the Galloway Hoard where there's all the videos that we've done. We did a 10-year celebration of our own with experts. We did a lecture about the silver, what we know about where the silver comes from. All of that information is there for you to watch. So I'll just give you the reasons why I think the story that's building up around the hoard is what it is. And then we'll go from there. Okay, so in the half an hour or so, let's fly through these different parts of the hoard. The other thing to say before I start, actually, that's a good reminder for me there. This is very typical of Viking Age hoards. These bars of silver and these stamped arm rings are very distinctive. As soon as they came out of the ground, the metal detecting team could tell what they were. We knew we're in the Viking Age as soon as you see one of these. They're very distinctive. And we know they date to about a 50-year period, about 875 to 925. So it's pretty precise. The hoards that have these things in them date to a very short window of time. Okay, so we know we're in the Viking Age. These are currency, basically. The Vikings don't use coins. The Anglo-Saxons do. The Carolingians on the continent do. But the Vikings are going in between all of these places. They're mobile. And they're hitting and running, and they're taking stuff away, and melting things into these bars of silver makes it easy to carry, makes it easy to trade across customs barriers, if you like. It's just silver. It weighs what it weighs, and if it's good silver, you know how much money you have by looking at it and weighing it, okay? And these stamped arm rings are a way of like wearing it. So you could give these to your followers. Here you go. And you know how much one of these things weighs because they're hammered out from these ingots. So each of these arm rings is half or a third of one of those bars. And we know that now from having weighed them all. So these things are being made to measure. So you have one of these and you know pretty much by looking at it and feeling how thick it is, just how much money in terms of silver you have. So it's a visual reminder. It's just an easy way to carry these things around, but also maybe show off a little bit. And that's the Vikings to a T. Okay. So we know we're in the Viking Age, but the difference between other famous hoards, like the Curedale Hoard, which is the biggest one in Lancashire, and like the Vale of York Hoard, both of these in the British Museum on display. The difference between those is that these hoards are a little bit later, 906 for the Curedale Hoard and 927 for the Vale of York Hoard. The silver objects, they're the ingots again, they're the arm rings again, they're kind of hacked to bits. They're not complete. Look at the Galloway Hoard again. These arm rings are mostly complete, and those ingots are all complete. So this is like the first stage before they begin to be traded. And again, that reinforces maybe the fact that this silver is being created, being manufactured, being produced and processed at Balmagee, maybe. Okay, that's another sign of that. So that's the difference between these. And that's why we think maybe Galloway Hoard is earlier than those, and that's why we've called it circa 900. Okay? But we can narrow that down a little bit further. The other thing to remember is that this is happening across the Viking world. What you have is a process in that window of time, from about 875 onwards, where you have what they call the display economy, wearing your silver, everything complete, and you get hoards like these. Both of these hoards are in the Netherlands. Here's one from 850 where everything is complete. The bars are complete. The neck ring is complete. The arm rings are still penannular. They're still as if they would have been worn yesterday. That's 850. Same place, Vesterkleef, 875. Just 25 years later, all of a sudden you got hacked up coins. You got hacked up bars of silver. We've gone from a display economy to a hack silver economy. First it was prestige, showing off. And then after a while it becomes, okay, but how much does that arm ring weigh? It's money versus prestige and display. And so that seems to be happening on the continent around the same time, maybe a generation before what's going on at Galloway. So maybe Galloway is capturing that process taking place, but in Scotland a little later. The movement from a display economy to a hack silver, a money economy. Maybe. The only problem is there's hack silver from nearby and from earlier than the Galloway Hoard. This is the Talnotry Hoard on display in the National Museum. Dates by those coins to around 875. So again, a generation maybe before the Galloway Hoard. What you have is a bunch of silver coins from different places, including Arabic coins made in Central Asia. The first of these Durham coins that you have in Scotland are found in the Talnotry Hoard. Couldn't be more important. Okay, and a bunch of other bits and pieces. So we don't know who's behind this, but there's Anglo-Saxon material, like that silver strap and those pins, and these spindle whorls maybe. But then there's Viking material, like this weight. That's for weighing your chopped up silver. So we're already in a hack silver economy, as well as this sort of, I don't know, the last remains of a Northumbrian display economy, maybe. And that's even before the Galloway Hoard hits the ground. These coins are already hacked up by the time they're in that hoard. They're not damaged, that's clipped. And these coins are even punched as if they're being worn. Okay, so these are not being used as money, they are being used for their weight in silver. And thanks to David, we have a new find of a Durham and it's confirmed now, since it came out of the ground a few years ago. I heard about it in this very room from David himself. It's been through the finds panel, and they've identified it as a very similar generation to the one in the Talnotri hoard. So these things are part of the same event, same year maybe, of deposition. Whoever's going through and trading with these hacked silver coins, these foreign coins, is going from Talnotri to Dalry and parts further north or parts further south. Okay, we have other silver coins like these Carolingian ones now in Dumfriesshire as well. So Talnotri belongs in this area. This is the silver that's floating around. So the Galloway Hoard is very much of its age. It's not a new thing, it's just the best example of its thing, basically. And it has these Viking arm rings, and again, not far from Talnotri, not far from Balmagee. We have one of these, we had one of these since the 19th century, I believe, came out of a hillock in Blackburn. Okay, so these silver arm rings are in southwest of Scotland before the Galloway Hoard. So it's part of what's in the air, it's in the water by the time of the hoard. But look at the size of those dots. This is a distribution map not of all Viking hoards, but of just those kinds of silver bars, right? And you can see right away that they're only being used in this area. They're an Irish Sea type of money. There's other kinds of arm rings that they're making in Scandinavia. There's other kinds of arm rings that are being used in the Northern Isles. They're not coming down here so much. This is being developed just for this area. And we used to think that they were all made in Dublin. But now, I don't know, we're having some doubts. Most of them are coming from Ireland. Their distribution is wider in Ireland. But the biggest finds of them are all on the other side of the Irish Sea. And so now there's some questions about really where they're being made. And that's kind of still all to play for. All right. The upper deposit, just to give you some vital statistics, is a little bit more hacked, a little bit more processed than the hoard below. The ingots are still complete, but they're not really regular. This one looks like a rush job, like the silver overspilled. So they're kind of in a hurry. These still have like a little sprue of silver sticking out of them. So these are a little bit more of a rush job, and some of the arm rings are more hacked. All right. So 70% of those arm rings are incomplete. So that's different from what's going on below. That's why I think this upper hoard isn't exactly the same time as the one below. The other important thing, of course, is that the upper part of the hoard has that cross, that fabulous cross. And there's nothing quite like this. There it is cleaned off. So that's how it comes to the lab, and that's after Mary Davis's conservatorship. The reason I'm showing this is not just because it's shiny. The reason I'm showing this is because it's in a pile of silver. And we know now, from looking back at the videos and the photographs of the day of discovery, that it's probably wrapped in a bag. There's bits of black organic material that come off, they kind of dissolve as soon as you expose them to the air. And so we think it was all wrapped up in a bag. And so the question is that cross just another hunk of silver? It's complete, it's still got its chain, it looks like it was worn yesterday, but it is almost complete, except it's missing whatever was here. That central setting, it would have had a gemstone, maybe a garnet, maybe an enamel, maybe a rock crystal, some kind of gem. But whatever the case is, it's gone. And so have they popped off this gemstone and then just left it for its silver? On the other hand, I really like the fact that it's otherwise pristine. It's not nicked. And this is something the Vikings do all the time. And you see it in the silver. They test it. They run their knife across the edge to see if it's pure silver on the inside. It's pristine. And the Anglo-Saxon objects are not nicked in that way. So I don't think it's been through many hands. I don't think it's been traded down the line. I think it's part of what's going on here. And I like the fact, and this is just me, but I like the fact that the cross is at the very top of the hoard, almost as if it's kind of offering its protection to everything that comes below, maybe. Okay? But it's possible that it's just another hunk of silver at that point. It's in amongst all the hacked silver. The bottom hoard, then, is a lot more complete. Only 23% of the arm rings are hacked. So still hacked, still money. This is still worldly wealth, okay? But a lot more pristine. Those ingots are of a nice, narrow, neat form. None of that weird stuff going on. And the other thing that's different is that they have written names on these arm rings, only in the lower deposit. The lower deposit has runes. There seems to be an order of these things. And there's different fold types. Some of them are folded just at one end. Some of them are folded at both ends. Some of them are left completely flat. That all seems deliberate, like it's got some order, some logic to it. And what's adding to this idea that there's a logic to it is that there's these runic inscriptions. Okay? So these three arm rings, all from the lower deposit again. These three arm rings have very short, 3 letters, or 2 in one case, 3-letter or 2-letter words on them. Then there's this one really long one that was undeciphered for a long time. And there's none of that in the upper hoard. So the upper hoard is different from this. It's almost like they're naming different bits. So maybe the fact that different fold types and different runes might tell us that these are different parcels. This is my parcel, that's your parcel. So it looks like the property of more than one person, but that only seems to be happening in the lower one. The only problem to that nice, neat theory is that there is one more runic arm ring, but it comes from the surface finds. When AOC and the metal detectors came out after the hoard was excavated, they go back and they excavate around the hoard, as you've seen, and then they find whatever silver is still kind of in the plow soil. And this was one of the finds. It's another one of these hacked arm rings with a full name on it. Egbrecht. We recognize that as Egbert. That's an English name. And all of these runes are in Old English. They seem to be abbreviations of names. Bear, Till, and Ed. You can think of Edwin. Tilred is an abbot who we know is in Cumbria at this time. Bear, there's any number of names that begin with these. These sound like abbreviated names. So it looks like they're naming parts of the hoard. But then that one remained a mystery this whole time. It didn't make any sense. It's in the same letters. It's as clear as day. We know where it starts. We know where it ends. We can read every single letter, but it didn't make any sense in any language. It's not Norse. It wasn't British, Welsh, wasn't Irish, nothing. It didn't make any sense for the longest time. I'm happy to say that I had a part in the cracking of this, but I wasn't the guy who cracked it, okay? My job as the researcher was to look down the microscope at all the silver, look at all the test marks, look at everything in very close detail, take all the detailed measurements, you know, the grunt work of measuring and doing this stuff, okay? While I was looking at the inscription, again, it had been photographed already and modeled already. These are all the letters. What I figured out, I noticed that there was something different about that last one. And so I put it under the microscope again, and that's what it reads. We thought it was one big, long word, okay? But that last one had something different about it. And if you look closely, there's a punch mark there and a punch mark there. And I gave it to Mary, our conservator, and she confirmed that these were deliberate, not accidental. They're actually made with the same tool. She can measure that in her absolutely high-spec microscope. So we confirmed that those are deliberate. They're in line with one another, made with the same tool, with the same hand. They're at the same angle. So they're deliberate. What it means is they're marking off the last letter of this as an abbreviation. And that makes us go back and say, what if these are actually different words? So that's one word. That's one word. And now, when you're looking for it, you can see there's a space here, and there's a space there. And so it all kind of starts to come together. So maybe these are words. And then that's a different word. So Yignaf didn't make any sense. But what about Yigna? F. And then Martin Goldberg, the principal curator, is in charge of this whole project, goes away with that. And I swear, like the next night, maybe didn't sleep or whatever, but like, cracked it, and then gives us to our runologist, and we send it to the experts, and they mull it over, all the caveats and all the things that are problematic with this, but actually this seems to work as the best explanation. This is Hygna, and then F. When we see it in manuscripts as an abbreviation, it means fil. It means wealth, property. And if you put it together, this is Hygna is this rare word that is used in Old English to mean a community, and specifically a monastic community. Quite often, not always, but quite often it means a monastic community. Okay? And wealth or property. This is the community's wealth is what we've run with, okay? So it means that there was 4 names. So you think 4 different people come together and bury their stuff. But then, sorry, there was 3 names. And then there's this 4th one that says, actually, this belongs to everybody. So what does that mean? We're still puzzling out this sort of interpretation of all of this. But it also connects with how they're using silver on site. So we come back to those original finds. There's a bit of a blob that I showed you, melted silver. Okay, and there's an armband and ingots. Well, these are all the other finds that come out after the hoard was discovered. Some of these we now think are likely displaced from the hoard by the plow. These are things that have been separated out. So that one looks very much like it belongs in the hoard. This guy does. The silver composition is very similar as well. This one even has these little X's that you get on ingots in the top layer. So we do think that some of this is displaced from the hoard. But some of these, the silver is just a very different composition, and it doesn't belong with what we know is in the hoard. Okay, so some of this is telling us that there is what silver goes into the ground as part of the hoard with names on it, with markings on it, and then there's the stuff that is being used and possibly made on site. That means that, again, the Galloway Hoard is not there by accident. It's on a living site. Probably a site where the wealth is coming through, where people are moving through. It's probably been a central place. And it's possible now that some of these ingots and things are being made on the site. Okay? Last bit of the silver then. This is the arm ring bundle. All of the other arm rings are flat. They're flattened. Except for the ones in this bundle. And these are the biggest ones. They're the heaviest ones, so the most silver, and the most elaborately decorated. And these are the ones that are still twisted into that arm ring shape. They're still wearable. But they're of different ages. They're not all cast and made there. Some of them are really worn, as if they've had a life before being bundled up here. And tucked into the middle of them in a wooden box with 3 bits of gold. And it all seems quite random, but also, again, it just looks like people coming together. There's 4 arm rings. And that reminds us of the 4 runic inscriptions and the 4 fold types. That number keeps coming up again. And so I think it's a group of people coming together. For what? To make an oath, to declare a vow, to buy or sell some land, to pass the site from one owner to another. Maybe this is the community's wealth of an ecclesiastical community. Why does a church have a ton of silver? Maybe it's melted down from reliquaries. Maybe it's melted down from other things in the treasury. And maybe that's why it's there. But if that's the case, if it is melted down from a church treasury, and that's what that word refers to, the community, then the church is part of this process. So it's not Vikings raiding if that's the case. So there's all these questions. And again, these things are Viking objects, as it were. They're being made in the Viking Age Irish Sea. But we know now the silver content of them is coming from Anglo-Saxon silver, very similar to the silver in the hoard. All of it looks structured, deliberate, not hurried, formal, like a contract. And I don't know what it means. And just these are the latest thinking on them. And there's a whole video about the silver content that you can still watch here. Okay. So now, having gone through all of that, the last bit of the story, and completely different, is all the stuff that's in that lidded vessel. And this is the weirdest stuff in the entire hoard. These silver objects are Anglo-Saxon. They're Trewhiddle style objects. Objects like these of this style are known from England, but not from Scotland until this hoard was found. So they bring us into the Anglo-Saxon world. They bring us into the Northumbrian world. And again, Balmaguey was at the heart of a Northumbrian kingdom before the Viking Age. Okay? All of these things are just weird. Okay? Basically. But the point is that they come from all over, and they represent something that's been gathered for a very long time. So a Viking hoard, you think of violence, a rush, put everything valuable, hide it away as fast as you can. Everything about this is the opposite. It tells us about structure, deliberation, logic, as if they're planning these things as a collection. Everything is deliberate here, okay? That's the hoard as it comes to the lab. That's Martin Goldberg, my boss, when they took it down to the British Museum for CT scanning and X-raying. Okay, so we had to see through all the wrappings before we could get into it. The silver-lidded vessel itself was wrapped, we now know, in 3 layers of textile. First, a white linen, plain, undyed, undecorated, shining white. And then this is tied off with a silk cord. So that lid is placed on, it's wrapped around in linen, and then it's tied off with a little dainty silk cord. Okay? Nothing rushed about that. And then the whole thing is wrapped in a big wool wrapper, and then it's upside down. It's inverted and then placed into the ground. All of these things, the lid, the wrappings, the fact that it was placed upside down, helped to create a little micro environment inside of it. The water didn't really get into it. It was able to preserve organic material, and the contact with the silver and the metal, the copper leaching out of this metal helps to preserve things as well. So it meant incredible survival. The lidded vessel is very rare. Sorry, that's the Vale of York cup. We had a very similar cup, but this is a Carolingian cup. This one always looked a little bit weirder. And again, Martin Goldberg is the one that identified this, not as a sort of crown or a floral arrangement, but specifically a fire altar. This is Sasanian artwork from Central Asia, from what's now Iran. And they, on their coins, on their artwork, they always display the fire altar. It's a symbol of the Zoroastrian religion. And that's that motif that's repeated over and over again on this bowl. So Martin's theory this whole time has been that this is imported from very far down the Silk Roads, not a Carolingian vessel. And now we've been able to prove that through silver analysis. With our friends at the University of Oxford, they were the ones that did all the silver analysis. They did the silver, they narrowed it down to a continental source, but then they took some of the silver from this black inlay called niello, and that's the decoration. So that's where the vessel was made. And the silver signal of that came down to specifically one silver mine in what's now Iraq. So we know this vessel comes from the Silk Road itself. Okay? And that's why when it went to the British Museum on display, it was placed along all these other objects that have come from across the Silk Roads. That was its first display ever. There in the context of all this material from Kazakhstan, from as far as China, Japan, and Korea, and now again, including Balmagi. So you see this dotted line, you know? The Silk Roads, we think of it as this sort of road that goes from here to China, you know, from the Middle East to China, but actually the Silk Road and the Silver Road now, I think it leads to here, okay? There's no doubt about it, okay? Finally, the clues about everything in there. As soon as this was exposed to air, the textile started degrading. So as soon as it comes out of the ground, it's inevitable. You can stick it in the fridge right away and it's already deteriorating a little bit. Just moving it, okay? But this is the image of it from the field, from Martin McSweeney. Was one of the team. This was the very first photograph of it when it was open, and you can see imprints of textile there. There's cord. That is almost completely gone by the time it gets to the lab. So this stuff is, I mean, basically just, it needs to be excavated. It needs to be done properly. And this is, you know, this is what we've been lucky to have this sort of record of everything here in the Galloway Hoard, okay? So that means that this upper layer, which is that, is all wrapped. So there's a bundle already within this bundle. That's the upper layer there. These beads are truly strange. Some of these are 6th century, that and that we now think are Merovingian. So they are 300 years old by the time, maybe 200, but certainly centuries old. These are 7th century, so 200 years old, 100 years old, depending on the date of the hoard itself. and this coin. This is a bead, another one of these glass beads that has cracked. And instead of throwing it away, they've made this lovely silver casing for it to preserve it. And they've helpfully dated that by putting a coin into it. And the coin is of 820 or so. So it's at least 3-4 generations old. So all of this stuff, going back to maybe the 6th century, the 7th century, the 9th century, and then this one from Ireland from the 9th century, bang up to date. And this brooch is from Ireland as well. So here you have a collection that's been passed down through the generations. Again, nothing is hurried about this. These are valuables that have been kept in a family probably for generations, okay? And then underneath that, all of those silver brooches that I showed you before and these complex bundles. So everything is in its little section. A bundle up here, a bundle down there, a stack of brooches here. Again, not hurried, not in a panic, okay? We know of these silver brooches from other Anglo-Saxon hoards, but this is the map of these disc brooches with Galloway way outside the distribution, okay? Most of them are coming from what becomes the Danelaw, okay? They're from East Anglia, Suffolk, Norfolk, a couple from Yorkshire, one now from Somerset there, which is that beautiful one there. So we're expanding the distribution, but they're way out of place here, okay? And then the stuff from this complex bundle, it just gets shinier and weirder. These are all the gold objects that came from one of the bundles, and here's one of the gold objects that came from a different one. Let's take each one in turn. This is the rock crystal jar. There is its wrapping. We now know from the scientific analysis, again, this couldn't have been done unless it had been taken to the lab and preserved right away. It is a pouch that is leather, lined on the inside with silk. And then the object itself is wrapped in linen. So 3 layers of precious material here, okay? So this is a really precious object. We now think that this rock crystal is ancient, maybe hundreds of years older than the gold object that wraps around it. So this is an heirloom of some description. And then it's made maybe in the 8th or the 9th century into this gold object. We call it a jar because that's kind of what it looks like. It has a little spout and has a channel that goes all the way down. I'll show you a few different views. And then underneath it, an inscription that gives us the name Higwald, who is a bishop. We don't know of a Bishop Higwald, but we know of lots of Higwalds in Northumbria. There's a Higbald, who is bishop of Lindisfarne at the time of the first Viking raids. But we are assured by our expert historian friends that Higwald and Higbald are not the same name. The style of the goldwork doesn't actually help us narrow it down very much because it's very unique. It's very of its one of a kind, okay? But it's 9th century maybe. And so there is a bishop involved here. Some of this stuff is coming from the church. That's the top and that's the bottom, okay? This is just an image of what we think this object came from. So I went to Rome recently, and there was the rockery, and one of the this is the Church of Saint Paul there in Rome, and they have this rockery. They have all the old Corinthian capitals, and then they have one upside down. Right side up, upside down. That's what we think that thing is. So this is the way Martin always explains it in his lectures. There's a Corinthian column. If you look at it that way, you erase the gold from your mind. It looks like it's originally been a rock crystal column. And we know that there were these rock crystal columns used in early Christian years because we have a couple that Martin has now seen in the Vatican Museum. They don't appear anywhere else. They're only known from the catacombs of Rome. And so that's why we think this is an antique object, that somebody has gone on pilgrimage to Rome perhaps and brought it back or have been gifted it, and then they make it into this marvelous thing. But it's certainly to hold a relic, I think, because it's got the bishop's name on it, it's gold, everything about it is weird and precious. This makes it seem that it's wrapped in this really elaborate container, this pouch. Everything about it screams relic, but it's empty now. So whatever it held, it wasn't holding anymore. So it's a treasured item, but maybe emptied of its precious contents. And then the last thing is the other pouch, which I'll just show you what these things are. 3 gold objects. Usually, we've only ever found these as singletons, When they come out of the ground, they're called eastels. They're things like the Alfred jewel, basically. They have a socket, and we used to think that they were pointers. They used to put like a little bone stick or a stylus, and you hold it and you point to your manuscript. But now we know that these come in a set of 3. They're all threaded with silk cord. Every one of these sockets has silk cord in it. There's a microscope image from Mary Davis again. Every single socket is full of cord. It's not for a stylus. It's not for a pointer. And in fact, it comes in a bundle with all of this intact silk braid. This is a dress object of some sort. We've never found these together. We've only found them as singletons. Now we think these are dress items of some elaboration, okay? I'm just going to have to zip through and tell you what it all means. This is Mary Davis's latest reconstruction. We have a gold object that is strung through with the silk braid, and we have the eastels, which are no longer eastels. We think now that there may be some kind of dress item, either for going around the waist, over the shoulders, or maybe as a headdress. These are just some possible ways in which it could have been worn. It could be for a bag, it could be around the waist, but they seem to go together. They seem to be very precious. There they are, reconstructed as a possible headdress. Okay? All of that put together. So why, and the dirt balls. We're out of time. There's possible relics, is what we think these are. These are balls of dirt that have been gathered. We know from X-ray and CT scan data that there's flecks of bone and flecks of gold right the way through these dirt balls. So they've been rolled in what looks like, the dust of a martyr's grave. So these look like relics of the Holy Land, and we have lots of records of people doing this, of getting a bit of dirt, rolling it in the tomb of the saint, and then bringing it back as a relic. We think that's what those are. That's the leading interpretation, but they haven't been analyzed. They're really rare, really precious. They're likely to fall apart if you try to sample or drill into them. They've never been on display. They're really intriguing, but they are in the context of this bishop's possible reliquary. Okay? So, all in all then, that lesson about the Galloway Hoard, it doesn't look like it's something gathered in a panic. It looks like worldly wealth, the silver, the money that is alienable. That means you can chop it up, you can hack it up, and you can weigh it up and, use it as currency. And then you have stuff that is more valuable than money. You have stuff that is curated for generations, passed down. Reliquaries at this time would have been the most valuable treasures, more valuable than any gold or any silver. And they're put together in this hoard. We have all these different clues, but what we know is that these are dress items that are female gendered. When you find beads like these, they're in women's graves. When you find rock crystal balls like that, they're in female graves. Okay? We don't know who's wearing these arm rings, but there are women involved here, there are bishops involved here, and now a community. So what is the Galloway Hoard and why Balmagee? I don't have those answers, but all of these clues are more than we ever have for any of the hoards that we have so far. So I'll just leave you with that. The answers on a postcard, please, but these are the clues that we have. So, I'll chat to you afterwards and see what you think. Thank you very much.